SDG 4 deals with quality education, and the key word that correlates with quality education is accessibility. The United Nations, through this particular SDG, is committing itself and its nations to equitable access to education, learning opportunities for all, lifelong and life-wide. Judging by the language used in the document, there is no doubt that the United Nations is advocating a social justice approach to education, which basically means not only opening educational spaces to all, but also guaranteeing equal outcomes as far as basic entitlement is concerned. Now, equity education has two dimensions. One of them is fairness. Injustice start way outside the school, and therefore governments have to guarantee equitable access through the right fiscal, economic, social and cultural policies. The second dimension then is inclusion, which implies basically that education systems have to ensure a basic minimum standard of education for all through effective and competent teaching, through relevant and interesting curricular experiences, through transparent assessment policies, to mention but three measures. Now the question is, why does equity in education matter? Why all this fuss about the equity in education agenda? There are various reasons why we should push for equity in education. First, there is the human rights imperative, then there are the long-term social and financial cost of educational failure, and there is also the democratic imperative. Now, equity in education cannot thrive in a values milieu which is informed by savage inequalities, profit before people, predatory economics, glorification of individualism, privatization of public goods, and ongoing attack on the welfare state. Unfortunately, the education system is not immune to this value system, and increasingly, globally, worldwide, we are seeing education systems which are increasingly being modified, bureaucratized, and standardized in their expectations. One size fits all, which militates against equity in education. So in order for equity in education to thrive, we have to reclaim equitable values and revision, so to speak, an educational world that is not. An educational world which is informed by collectivity, community, solidarity, diversity, border crossing, etc., etc. Now, if we focus on our education system, the statistics are not encouraging, and in fact 1/3 of our students coming out of our education system come out of the system without the basic competencies. Now, when we dig deeper and analyze who these children are, we immediately realize that low socioeconomic status students are overrepresented as far as low educational attainment is concerned. In other words, there is a strong correlation between socioeconomic background and educational attainment. If we break this situation further and we correlate educational attainment with fathers' educational background, you can see that there is a huge difference between children with fathers with very low educational attainment and children coming from educational backgrounds with fathers with high educational attainment. So in other words, when we correlate the educational attainment of parents, mothers and fathers, we see that there is a strong correlation between the educational milieu within the family and the child's educational attainment, and therefore the education system unfortunately is not intervening adequately and effectively to break such a cycle. This, of course, has implications later on. As you can see from this slide, there is a strong correlation between educational background, income, disposable income, and educational attainment. There is also a very strong correlation in adulthood between the level of education that the individual has and the participation rate in lifelong learning, in non-formal, in this case, education. There is also a strong correlation between attempts to further one's education and dropout rate as per educational backgrounds. In other words, low educational background is heavily correlated with adults trying to restart their education process and unfortunately dropping out. There is also a very strong correlation between geography and educational attainment. As you can see from the slide, unfortunately there is a huge divide not only in terms of the traditional harbour area and the rest, but there is also a huge divide between rural areas and small villages and towns. Unfortunately, there are grave consequences as far as personal and social well-being correlated with low education attainment. As you can see from the slide, unfortunately, high depression rate amongst so-called early school leavers, and therefore that correlates also with high consumption of antidepressants. There are other consequences correlated with low educational attainment, material deprivation, social exclusion, precarious health, precarious mental well-being, etc., etc. What needs to be done in terms of fairness? As we intimated before, we need to refocus social, economic and public policies to aggressively tackle social and economic disadvantages outside the school, because we know that these disadvantages correlate with low educational attainment and therefore social injustices. In terms of education, there's a lot to be done. Some of the ideas are listed here: limiting early tracking and streaming, focusing on high quality professionals, prioritizing early childhood provision and basic schooling, setting concrete targets for equity, and also strengthening links between home and school.